So June 19, 1865. Imagine waking up that morning in Texas. You get up before sunrise, you prepare breakfast, you take care of the kids, you head to work, you assume today will be much like yesterday because for generations life has followed the same brutal logic. The people who own the land own you. The people who hold power determine your future. And then sometime that day, word begins to spread. A Union general named Gordon Granger has arrived in Galveston. An announcement is being made. The announcement changes everything, or perhaps more accurately, it reveals that everything had already changed. Because, like we heard before, more than 2 years earlier, unknown to you, President Abraham Lincoln had issued the Emancipation Proclamation. 2 months earlier, the Civil War was effectively over. Yet some 250,000 enslaved people in Texas and others in other places were still living under slavery. Think about that. One America knew. One America didn't. One America was debating the future, and one America was still trapped in the past. Same country, same sky, different worlds. Different worlds existing side by side. So as early as 1866 there in Galveston and then across Texas, Emancipation Day began to be celebrated on June 19th with parades, prayer, singing, readings of the proclamation. Enslaved people and their descendants commonly made pilgrimages to Galveston on this day. Now, I've been to Galveston twice in my life, and as a white person, I was appalled to realize that I had not known this significance to Black Americans. Again, two different worlds sometimes. As time went on, Juneteenth became a moment to celebrate African American culture with everything from public readings of works by Black authors, blues festivals, soul foods. But for generations, Juneteenth itself became an example of these different worlds that exist right here in the United States. In many Black communities, it is a cherished annual celebration. Other places in the country, unknown. And it wasn't until 2021, just 5 years ago, that it was recognized as a federal holiday, making Juneteenth the 11th American federal holiday and the first new federal holiday since Martin Luther King Jr. Day back in 1983. Again, different worlds. Years of some people knowing and celebrating Juneteenth and others just discovering it a few years ago. Or maybe you don't have to show your hands, discovering it this morning. And that is a good example of those different worlds, different experiences that didn't go away with the end of slavery. Now, I know many of us know about the turbulent years following the Civil War, but it wasn't until Isabel Wilkerson, who I got to meet at the Chautauqua Institute in New York, if anybody's been there. I got to meet her there after she released her 2010 really masterpiece, The Warmth of Other Suns. This really changed the way scholars and the general public understood a period that began in 1910 and ran to about 1970, which we now call the Great Migration. And during this period, more than 5 million Black Americans left the still oppressive conditions of the South, looking for places that had better safety, dignity, opportunity. They weren't searching just for freedom, but for a world where they and their children could flourish. Somewhere in their hearts was a vision out there of a beloved community, and they went seeking it. And they were greeted in places like Chicago and Los Angeles by challenges that were different, but still reflective of the injustices they had hoped to leave behind. Even in these new home cities, different worlds continue to exist side by side. The struggle wasn't slavery anymore, but the work of building a society where every person could thrive. That was far from being finished. For me, I think that's one of the lessons of Juneteenth, that different worlds can exist right in the same place, in the same city, same school, same congregation, same nation. The question isn't whether different worlds, different experiences exist. The question is what we do when we discover them. You know, Juneteenth is often framed as a celebration, and it is. Celebration of freedom, but I think it's also a question. Because the announcement in Galveston, as we've heard, was not the end of the story by any means. Story continues and continues now. Freedom had been proclaimed, but what would freedom actually mean? What kind of society would emerge after slavery and move into the present day? What kind of future was being built? Would formerly enslaved people have opportunities to flourish? What about their kids? What about their communities? Would their dignity be recognized in our systems? Or would freedom exist mostly on paper, while injustice simply found new forms in practices? As we all know too well, I think, these questions certainly didn't disappear in 1865. In a lot of ways, they remain our contemporary questions. And we've seen Americans in recent years, right now, grappling in unhealthy ways with these questions as they've turned towards supporting an overtly racist national leadership and white nationalism. And all of this leaves us with the question of what kind of world are we creating? You know what else we're celebrating? We celebrated this week on June 12th. Anybody notice? It was Loving Day on June 12th. Yeah. Commemorating the Supreme Court decision that struck down laws prohibiting interracial marriage. You remember Richard and Mildred Loving? Great last name, right? Couldn't be more perfect for that. But they wanted something remarkably ordinary. They wanted to build a life together. They wanted to love openly. They wanted a family. Yet society told them that that family should not exist. Juneteenth, Loving Day, both bring forward a similar question. Not simply are people free, but what kind of world allows people to flourish? Now, Martin Luther King Jr. had a name for that world. It's something we use a lot in our UU community. Beloved community is what he called it. Not a perfect world, not a conflict-free world, not a world where everyone thinks alike, but a world where every person's dignity is recognized, a world where every person has an opportunity to flourish, a world where our lives are understood to be bound together. And that brings me to what I think may be the deepest gift Juneteenth offers us, or one of them anyway, and it was something Carol read this morning from Kimberly Quinn Johnson, this idea of Black joy, which I'm grateful for Kimberly for sharing that with all of us, for sharing that with our faith. Because what fascinates me about those first Juneteenth celebrations isn't that the work was finished and then they celebrated, right? Struggle wasn't over. Discrimination wasn't gone. Violence remained, economic inequality remained and remains. The long fight for voting rights remained. The work of building beloved community had barely begun. Yet folks gathered anyway. They prayed anyway. They sang anyway. They cooked anyway. They celebrated anyway. Why? Why celebrate before the work is done? Because celebration itself is part of the work. Black joy. The people who first celebrated Juneteenth weren't taking a break from building beloved community. They were building it. Every prayer, every song, every shared meal, every family gathering was a declaration that another world was possible, because they understood something profound. Beloved community is not something we wait for. It's something we practice. Now, black joy can be misunderstood. People hear the word joy and imagine happiness, cheerfulness, optimism, but black joy is something deeper. It's the refusal to let oppression define reality. It's the refusal to let injustice have the final word. It's the audacity to insist that beauty, laughter, family, music, faith, and community remain possible even in difficult times. Black joy says, we're going to gather anyway. We will love anyway. We will celebrate anyway. We will build community anyway. You know, every one of us carries struggles: grief, fear, illness, uncertainty, conflict, disappointment. The question is whether we will wait until everything is fixed before we live, or whether we will continue gathering, loving, celebrating, and building community in the midst of life's imperfections. That's the wisdom of black joy. That's the practice of beloved community. And I found myself this week thinking about beloved community in a rather unlikely place a few days ago, next to a wrecked car, totaled car. As some of you may know, I was involved in a serious car accident earlier this week. Nobody was significantly hurt, and it wasn't my fault, so we'll get that out of the way. But 4 vehicles, totaled cars, police officers, tow truck drivers, some guy who was already on the scene trying to get us to go to his attorney's office. How did he know? Strangers standing beside the road trying to understand what had happened. The driver that caused the truck that caused the accident was shaken and asking if everybody was okay. A woman I'd never met was sharing her dash cam footage so people could understand what had happened. A fabulous queer police officer, she was calmly holding the situation together. Tow truck drivers, emergency responders, strangers, people checking on one another, people trying to help. And standing there beside the wrecked car, I realized how fragile everything is. A few minutes before, I was thinking about the week I'd been having, and it had been a week. Minutes later, I was musing on how quickly life can change, how fragile and precious life is, how grateful I was to be alive, even living in a world that has so many challenges at the moment. I found myself having a thought I often have when I board a plane or train or bus. This is not my original thought. I don't know where it came from, but I remember the person of faith sharing this with me a long time ago. She said whenever she gets on a train or a plane or a bus or something like that, or she's sitting in a room, she looks around and she says, "These are my people. For this moment, in this place, these are my people." Not because we share the same politics or because we share the same life experiences, not because we agree about everything, not because we even know each other. These are my people because for the moment, even because of a car crash, our lives are intertwined. We are sharing the same journey. So standing beside that road, watching these folks around me, showing care and concern in that moment, I thought, these are my people. And perhaps that is where Juneteenth ultimately leads us. It begins with different worlds, but it points toward a larger truth. Our lives are connected whether we always know it or not. King called it that inescapable network of mutuality. And beloved community is not built because we're all the same. It's built because we learn to recognize one another's humanity across our differences. Those first celebrators of Juneteenth, they knew that. They knew the work wasn't over, but they claimed joy anyway. They began living into the world they hoped to create. And that, I think, is their gift to all of us. That reminder that we don't have to wait for a perfect world before we begin practicing beloved community. We don't have to wait until every problem is solved before we choose joy. Because the truth is, folks, that in some form or another, we're all often standing beside a road marked by a car crash or two. That's just life from time to time. And even though those circumstances are not ideal, they remind us that this beloved community is not a glimpse into the future. We can already see it if we look here and there. It's a meal shared, a song sung, a stranger helping a stranger, a community gathered amidst struggle and loss, a frightened driver asking everyone if they're okay. And when it appears, even briefly, we catch a glimpse of the world Juneteenth has always pointed toward. A world where people check on each other after a car crash. A world where strangers share what they know to help one another. A world where someone steps forward to hold things together when everything feels chaotic. A world where every person's dignity matters. A world where every person has the opportunity to flourish. A world where we recognize that our lives are bound up with one another. A world where we can look around, even at a gathering of strangers, and say, "These are my people." Say it with me, folks. These are my people. May it be so.